Immanuel Kant, the most overrated philosopher in history. Anti-Enlightenment fraud. Kant lived from 1724 to 1804. He was born into a German family of Lutheran faith in Königsberg, East Prussia. The Kant household stressed the pietist values of religious devotion, humility, and literal interpretation of the Bible. He received a strict, punitive, disciplinary education focused on Latin and religious instruction rather than mathematics and science. Kant enrolled in college to study theology and received a master's and a doctorate degree in philosophy. He became an associate professor at the University of Königsberg in logic and metaphysics in 1734. This foreshadows his major philosophical works and why he undertook them. Kant is one of the most widely known and highly regarded philosophers. What he's mainly known for is his metaphysics and his epistemology, not his ethics. A major motivation for Kant's philosophical thoughts on metaphysics and epistemology was his reaction to David Hume. Kant was deeply worried about David Hume's skepticism, threatening the foundations of religion, morality, and supposedly science. Kant credited Hume with awakening him from his dogmatic slumber by demonstrating that reason alone cannot objectively prove the concept of causality. Kant was concerned about this because all traditional arguments for the existence of God relied on cause and effect. I've already done 3 videos on David Hume. David Hume is considered an empiricist, and yet he provided no empirical evidence for his positions. In fact, he attacked the idea of cause and effect with his absurd billiard ball example, which was just a pure thought experiment. This did not include any empirical data, which should have disqualified him as a fraud from the very beginning. I did a video on his is-ought nonsense about ethics. This video is about metaphysics and epistemology, not ethics. So I think it's fair to say that Kant's main motivation in his major work, which was entitled Critique of Pure Reason, was to counter David Hume's skepticism and to save his religious belief in God from Hume's skepticism. Kant and his propagandists loved to say, in fact, he was trying to save science. He didn't seem to give a damn about science. If Kant had given a damn about science, it would have been easily proven that Hume's attack on science was nonsense, as I've shown in my other videos on David Hume. Hume should have never been taken seriously. He was an anti-Enlightenment fraud. Kant divides the world into 2 realms, the noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm. The noumenal realm is objective reality, the world exactly as it is, completely independent of human observation. The problem is that it's fundamentally unknowable because we supposedly alter it with our mental thought processes. The phenomenal realm is the world that we experience. It's objective reality, the world of sight, sounds, and textures in science. It is the raw noumenal data after it passes through our ears, eyes, and brains. And we experience this realm, we are experiencing our brain's process to interpret it. David Kelly's excellent book entitled Evidence of the Senses completely destroys this nonsense. I also did a video on this. So we can see Kant's metaphysics is very Christian. The noumenal realm be nothing more than heaven. The phenomenal realm is earth. That informs this quote from Kant in the preface of the 2nd edition of the Critique of Pure Reason. Quote, I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. Clearly, Kant's concern here is about Hume's attack on faith and religion, not about science at all. And this quote makes it clear that Kant is not being objective, but a rationalist justifying a preconceived position. Kant further informs us about these 2 realms with the sunglasses analogy. He analogizes, imagine you're born wearing permanent, unremovable, blue-tinted sunglasses. Everything you see is blue. You can measure the shades of blue, categorize them, and build a whole science around blue objects. That is the phenomenal world. You can never take the glasses off and see what the colors of the world actually are. That's hidden. True color reality is the nominal world. For Kant, our sunglasses are space, time, and cause and effect. Kant's epistemology is centered around his ideas of analytic and synthetic knowledge. Analytic knowledge, according to Kant, consists of statements or propositions that are true purely by definition or logical meaning. Its truth value can be known without observing the physical world, without gathering evidence. Synthetic knowledge is information that requires sensory experience or empirical observation to verify, unlike analytical truths that are true by definition, such as bachelors are unmarried men is their example. Synthetic claims add new information to the subject and that their truth depends on the world and how the world actually is. Kant is also one of those philosophers who believes in a priori knowledge. That's knowledge that is inherent to the structure of the human mind. It does not come from the world we experience. But the big thing that supposedly distinguishes Kant and makes him such a genius, according to his fanboys, is that he proposes that you can have synthetic a priori knowledge, which is an oxymoron. A priori knowledge is known before, that is, independent of experience. It's universal, necessary, and certain. For example, 2 + 2 = 4. Every event has a cause. Geometrical truths, like the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line. Kant argues that we can have synthetic a priori knowledge. That is, statements that come from senses but are known before somehow. Statements that are informative about a world that is synthetic, yet necessarily without experience, a priori. This is central to his critique of pure reason. They present this as if it's somehow unique, but in fact this is very much Plato's theory of forms. We can combine our a priori knowledge with our senses to understand them better. So in fact, Kant is an attack on the Enlightenment. He is not reason, he is rationalization. Reason can only tell us about the non-real phenomenal world, according to Kant. The real world, nominal realm, according to Kant, we can't discover it at all. We're completely outside of it. Thus, we can't question the existence of God or of heaven, because those are in the nominal realm, and our senses and reason are incapable of discovering it. So now that we've got an idea of what Kant's metaphysics and epistemology are, let's compare it to Plato's metaphysics and epistemology. Plato divides the world into 2 realms, the visible world and the world of forms. The visible world is the world that we perceive by our senses. The intelligible world, or the world of forms, is perfect and absolute and cannot be perceived. Is that beginning to sound familiar? According to Plato, to explain his metaphysics and epistemology, he turns to the allegory of the cave, which explains that living in the world is like our senses can only perceive shadows. We don't actually sense the real world of forms. With Kant, we have on these permanent sunglasses, which distort our ability to see the real world, and both of them talk about a priori knowledge. With Plato, a priori knowledge is something we are born with. It's knowledge that we don't get from our senses or from our experiences in the visible world. With Kant, our a priori knowledge is independent of experience. It's necessarily true. Though both philosophers share a dualistic framework, separating the world into how it appears and how it truly is, the supposed difference between the two is that Kant fundamentally inverted Plato's philosophy rather than plagiarizing it. They say, where Plato's absolute truth is independent of the senses, Kant argues that the mind actively constructs reality. People who believe that their mind actively constructs reality have a mental illness. It's very much like your child believing that he's got an imaginary friend. This is just a word salad bullshit, and only a highly educated person who's been indoctrinated for years can buy this nonsense. It's clear plagiarism. If any college freshman turned in a paper like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, they would clearly get an F for plagiarism. Philosophers trying to prop up Kant and claiming that this difference in the world we cannot experience is unknowable or unalterable by our senses, rather than can only be discovered through rational meditation, is clear nonsense. Wow, that's a huge difference. So Kant is a fraud and just learned over Plato at best. A big part of Kant's epistemology is the distinction between analytic and synthetic knowledge. According to Kant, synthetic knowledge is knowledge where the predicate adds new information to the subject, thereby expanding our understanding of the world. Unlike analytic knowledge, which is merely true by definition, it amplifies and cannot be deduced through logic or principle or non-contradiction alone. Stripping away the word salad, synthetic knowledge is that which we gain from experience, and analytic knowledge is that which is just a priori true. A priori, or that is analytic knowledge, is that which is known before, independently of experience. It's universal, necessarily and certain. For example, 2 + 2 = 4. The idea that this knowledge is independent of experience is just absolutely nonsense. 2 + 2 = 4 because we understand counting. And counting comes from experience. It's not something that we know before or independent of experience. Kant propagandists love to make a big deal about his ability to come up with supposed synthetic a priori judgments, which are a big innovation according to them. Synthetic a priori judgments are information and yet necessarily true and universal. That is, for example, 7 + 5 = 12. Geometrical truths, or every event has a cause. This makes mathematics, physics, and metaphysics possible, according to Kant. There is no more a synthetic a priori judgment than 2 + 2 = 4. This is just word salad bullshit. As the famous mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss said, in my opinion, his distinction between analytic and synthetic theorems is such a one that either peters out in triviality or is false. It's important to understand, under Kant's philosophy, he completely destroys science. He says our cognitive faculties actively structure our experience. We can only know things as they appear to us, not as they are in themselves. Well, that's convenient. What if there are 2 or more observers? We're both changing reality? Do we observe the same thing? Kant never answers these questions. Or do we have a coincidence problem? And this is how we get to the nonsense of consensus science, which turns science on its head and denies the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction. So Kant should be laughed at as an absurd childlike person with a mental illness, not treated as profound. His noumenal world is like your child's imaginary friend. We can't see it, we can't touch or sense it. It never seems to have any effect until the child says it does. This is just infantile. It's just absurd that people take this guy seriously. The people who take him seriously are people who are frauds and want to push fraud. Know that the whole Western leftist Marxist movement is in love with Kant's philosophy. Note he's saying this insane sort of stuff after Newton, after Locke, and after Bacon, all who demonstrated reason with empirical evidence. Something that, despite suggesting that Kant is an empiricist, Kant never does. That is, he never provides any empirical evidence for his positions. He's just a pure rationalist. This is another piece of philosophical propaganda, which needs to be stomped out at its source because it's a pure lie and fraud. There is overwhelming evidence for Aristotelian logic, which, by the way, is used in every computer and every digital device in the world, including the one you're probably listening to this on. The evidence for Bacon's induction is overwhelming and is used in all classical science and classical physics. Yet Kant never provides any evidence, never shows that there's a problem with Aristotle, Bacon, or Locke. He just suggests that there's this imaginary world with his imaginary friends that no one can see. So the idea that Kant is an Enlightenment thinker is just nonsense. The foundation of the Enlightenment is reason, which means it's built on evidence and logic, not rationalization. Kant reintroduces the whole mystical world of Plato by suggesting that there's a world we can't see, we can't know, and that we have no idea why things happen. He denies the law of identity because under the law of identity, Things have to act in accordance with themselves. They can't act differently. You can't shape reality by your perceptions. With Kant, if we can get everyone to believe that global warming is real or climate change is real, then we can change reality. This is exactly what this sort of Kantian nonsense leads to. It leads to tyranny, it leads to starvation, misery, and evil. Kant is no more an empiricist than David Hume was. Neither one of them provided any empirical evidence for their point of view. Modern philosophers try to suggest that there's only pure empiricists or pure rationalists, or as Kant would say, pure reason, suggesting that there's a divide between reason and empirical evidence. The reality is that this nonsense is summed up in this statement: facts divorced from concepts are just noise. Concepts divorced from facts are just fantasy. It's very important to understand Kant's motivation. His motivation was to save religion and faith. As he said in the second edition to the Critique of Pure Reason, I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith, which shows his real goal was saving religion. It had nothing to do with saving science, which propagandists love to say all the time. In fact, he completely undermines science. He undermines the law of identity, undermines the law of causality, he undermines the ability of the observer to tell you what's real. The effect of this is to destroy science. In fact, Immanuel Kant profoundly shaped quantum mechanics, particularly the Copenhagen interpretation, by establishing the limits of human knowledge. That's not science. His philosophy directly inspired concepts like force principle of complementary, for example, the wave-particle duality, and the lack of causality, and the observer affecting the experiment. The Copenhagen interpretation always talks about how events have to be observed in order for the wave function to collapse. This sort of nonsense in physics has resulted in the fact that physics has made almost no progress in the last 100 years. It's also led to the confusion of suggesting that there are 4 dimensions that somehow can be warped and expanded or contracted in Einstein's relativity. This violates the law of identity. It's just nonsense. Newton warned us about this sort of nonsense. Kant is grossly overrated. He's a plagiarist and he's evil. Interestingly enough, for Austrian economists, Ludwig von Mises's Epistemology and Praxeology are based on and basically the same as Kant's epistemology. In summary, despite the protestations of Kant's advocates, Immanuel Kant is not part of the Enlightenment. He was anti-reason, was a rationalist, in fact denied that we can ever tell reality. He argues we're permanently stuck with these sunglasses that distort our understanding of reality. Kant's noumenal world, which we can't see, we can't ever discover, we have no idea why it exists, is basically a fraud and pushed by fraudsters who want to destroy people's ability to think so they control them, or it's a mental disease. It's the mental illness of infantilism. It's the sort of thing your child does. For instance, thinking that he has an imaginary friend, but we can't see them, can't hear them, or sense them. Kant's ideas have proven to cause untold destruction. In fact, all the totalitarian dictatorships, such as Nazism, fascism, socialism, and communism, are based in Kantian metaphysics and epistemology. Kant's ideas undermine physics and science. It's introduced the absurd idea of the observer changing reality. Kant makes the absurd infantile argument that the world must conform to the structure of the human mind, rather than the mind observing and understanding the world. This is something you get from someone who's a child. It's a mental illness. That's why we have the idea of consensus in science, as we've seen in the global warming discussion. In fact, there's no consensus at all. This is a sort of nonsense pushed by fraudsters who want to control you and want to destroy your ability to think. And this is how Kant destroyed physics. He suggested that the observer is necessary in order for an event to take place. In the language of quantum mechanics, the wave function only collapses when it's been observed. Of course, they never actually define what that means, what it means to be observed. They just throw it out whenever it's convenient for their point of view. In fact, the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics has just been a complete disaster. Physics has not moved forward in almost 100 years. As Carver Mead said, who was one of the premier physicists of the late 20th century and early 21st century, quote, "It's my firm belief the last 7 decades of the 20th century will be characterized in history as the dark ages of theoretical physics. Kant is anti-Enlightenment, anti-reason, anti-human, evil. Long live freedom, damn it."